Mom died and left her house, cash, and car to my stepdad and stepsister. I got her shabby old shawl. My stepsister snorted, "She gave you a rag? Wow. That's what she thought of you." A month later, she called, shaking, "You still have that shawl? I'll pay anything for it." Turns out Mom had. The funeral was on a Thursday. Gray sky, light drizzle, the kind of weather that feels almost too appropriate, like the universe is trying a bit too hard. I stood at the back of the small crowd gathered around the casket, watching people I barely recognized dab at their eyes with tissues. Mom had been sick for 2 years, so most of us had already done our crying in hospital waiting rooms and late-night phone calls. By the time she actually went, it felt less like a door slamming and more like a long exhale finally reaching its end. Richard, my stepfather, stood at the front with his daughter Megan beside him. They'd been in my life for 12 years now, ever since Mom married Richard when I was 15. I'd never called him Dad. He'd never asked me to. We existed in a kind of polite neutrality, two people sharing a woman we both loved but never quite figuring out how to love each other. Megan was different. Megan had decided early on that I was competition, and she'd spent the better part of a decade making sure I knew I was losing. After the burial, everyone went back to Richard's house. Mom's house, I still thought of it, even though she'd signed everything over to him years ago. The living room filled with the quiet murmur of condolences, the clink of coffee cups, the rustle of people not knowing what to do with their hands. I found myself standing by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, wondering when it would be acceptable to leave. That's when the lawyer arrived. His name was Patterson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase that looked older than I was. He gathered us in the study, Richard's study, and spread papers across the desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this 100 times before. Richard sat in the leather chair behind the desk. Megan stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, playing the devoted daughter. I took the chair across from them, feeling like I was sitting on the wrong side of an interview. Patterson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hartley updated her will 6 months ago," he said, flipping open a folder. "I'll summarize the primary bequests." He began reading. The house went to Richard, which made sense. They'd been married for over a decade, and it was his name on the mortgage anyway. The car went to Megan, a practical sedan Mom had bought 3 years ago and barely driven since her diagnosis. The savings account, what remained of it after hospital bills, went to Richard as well. Patterson listed a few smaller items: jewelry to various friends, a donation to the hospice that had cared for her, books to the local library. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, waiting. "And finally," Patterson said, adjusting his glasses, "to my daughter, Claire Rebecca Hartley, I leave my woolen shawl. The gray one with blue edging that belonged to my mother. I trust she will understand its value." The room went quiet. I blinked. "Her shawl?" Patterson looked up from the papers. "That appears to be correct." Richard shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable. Megan's hand tightened on his shoulder, and then she made a sound. A small, sharp sound that might have been a cough but wasn't. When I looked at her, she had her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide and bright. She was trying not to laugh. "I'm sorry," she said, lowering her hand. Her voice was thin with barely suppressed amusement. "I'm sorry, a shawl?" "Megan," Richard said quietly. "No, I'm sorry, but this is..." She shook her head, her lips curling into something that wanted to be a smile but kept pretending to be sympathy. "Claire, I'm so sorry. That's just, wow. A shawl. That's what she left you. After everything." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure what there was to say. Patterson was gathering his papers, clearly eager to escape the family dynamics he'd accidentally wandered into. He handed Richard a pen to sign something, then me, and then he was shaking hands and murmuring something about being available if we had questions and slipping out the door like a man who'd seen enough grief to know when to make an exit. Megan was still standing there, shaking her head. The car alone is worth what, 15,000? And Richard's getting the house, and the savings, and you're getting... She paused, tilting her head like she was trying to work out a particularly difficult math problem. "A rag. She gave you a rag, Claire. That's what she thought of you." "It was her mother's," I said. The words came out flatter than I'd intended. "Oh, well, then. A vintage rag." Megan pressed her hand to her chest in mock appreciation. "That changes everything. I'm sure you can wear it to Thanksgiving. Really make a statement." Richard was staring at the desk, saying nothing. "The shawl meant a lot to her," I said. I wasn't sure why I was defending it. I wasn't sure why I was still sitting there. Clearly not as much as the house meant to Richard. Megan patted her father's shoulder. "Or the car meant to me. But hey, at least you got something, right? It's the thought that counts. Even if the thought was..." She pursed her lips, searching for the right word, minimal. I stood up. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Richard looked up at me with something in his eyes that might have been guilt or might have been exhaustion. I couldn't tell anymore. I should go, I said. Take some food, Richard offered, his voice hoarse. There's plenty. I'm fine. Claire. He started to stand. Really? I'm fine. I'll get the shawl and go. I found it upstairs, in the closet of the master bedroom. Mom's closet, still full of her clothes, still smelling faintly of the lavender sachets she kept tucked between her sweaters. The shawl was folded on the top shelf, soft gray wool with a thin blue border, worn in places, pilled in others. I'd seen her wear it 1,000 times. She'd wrap it around her shoulders on cold mornings, tuck it over her lap when she sat by the window, pull it tight around herself when she was watching television alone. I pressed it to my face and breathed in. It smelled like her. Like lavender and something else. Something I couldn't name. Something that made my throat close up and my eyes sting. I took it downstairs, past the living room where Megan was laughing at something with one of Richard's business partners, past the kitchen where strangers were covering casserole dishes with plastic wrap. I let myself out the front door without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove home with the shawl on the passenger seat beside me, and I didn't cry until I was inside my apartment with the door locked and the lights off, and then I cried for a very long time. The weeks that followed were strange. Grief does that, I think. It rearranges time, stretches some days into years and compresses others into nothing. I went to work. I came home. I ate things I didn't taste and watched shows I didn't see. The shawl stayed on my couch, where I dropped it the night of the funeral, and every time I walked past it I felt something twist in my chest that I couldn't quite name. My friends called. My coworkers sent cards. Everyone wanted to know how I was doing, and I gave them the same answer every time. I'm okay, I'm hanging in there, I'm taking it one day at a time. All the things you're supposed to say when someone asks about your grief and you know they don't actually want the real answer. The real answer was that I wasn't sure what I felt. Sad, yes. That was the baseline, the constant hum underneath everything else. But there was something else mixed in with the sadness, something that felt uncomfortably close to anger. Mom had left me a shawl. After everything, after all the years, after every birthday and Christmas and phone call and hospital visit, she'd looked at her life and decided that what I deserved was a piece of old wool. I tried to tell myself it was the thought that counted. I tried to believe that the shawl meant something, that Mom had chosen it deliberately, that there was some deeper significance I was missing. But every time I thought about it, I heard Megan's voice in my head, bright and mocking. A rag. She gave you a rag. That's what she thought of you. A month passed. Then another week. I'd started to fold the shawl and put it away somewhere, telling myself I'd deal with it later, when my phone rang on a Tuesday evening. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I saw the name on the screen and my stomach did something complicated. Megan. We hadn't spoken since the funeral. We rarely spoke at all, actually, except when family obligations forced us into the same room. I stared at the phone, watching it vibrate on my kitchen counter, seriously considering letting it go to voicemail. But something made me answer. Hello, Claire? Megan's voice was different. Tight, strained, like she was holding something back. Hi. It's Megan. I know. Your name came up. A pause. Then, do you still have it? Have what? The shawl. Mom's shawl. Do you still have it? I frowned. Why? Just, do you have it or not? Did you throw it away? No, I didn't throw it away. I felt a prickle of irritation. What's going on, Megan? She made a sound on the other end of the line. It might have been a laugh, but it came out wrong, jagged and high-pitched. I'll pay you for it. I blinked. What? The shawl. I'll pay you for it. Whatever you want. Name a price. Megan, what are you talking about? Just tell me how much you want for it, Claire. I'm serious. I'll give you anything. I pulled the phone away from my ear and stared at it, like somehow looking at the screen would help me understand what was happening. Then I put it back to my ear. Are you okay? You sound, I don't know, you sound weird. I'm fine. She wasn't fine. Her voice was shaking now, and I could hear something in the background, what sounded like Richard's voice, low and urgent. Please, Claire. The shawl. It's important. Important how? A month ago you called it a rag. I know what I said. I was wrong, okay? I was wrong about a lot of things. There was a catch in her voice, something that sounded almost like panic. Please. I need it. I need you to bring it to me. Megan, you're freaking me out. What's going on? A long pause. Then, quieter, there's something inside it. Inside it? Sewn into the lining. We found some papers and Mom's things, notes, instructions. Her voice dropped even lower. She hid something in the shawl, Claire. Something valuable. And I need to know what it is. I looked across the room at the shawl, still draped over my couch where I'd left it. Gray wool, blue edging, worn and pilled and faded. Mom's shawl. Her mother's shawl before that. A rag, Megan had called it. A minimal thought. Claire? Are you still there? I'm here. Will you bring it, please? I know I haven't always been, just please. This is important. I thought about saying no. I thought about hanging up, turning off my phone, pretending this conversation had never happened. Let Megan stew in whatever panic she'd worked herself into. Let her wonder. Let her feel even a fraction of what I'd felt, standing in that study, learning that my mother had left me nothing but an old piece of cloth. But that wasn't who I was. And despite everything, Megan was still family. Sort of. I'll be there in an hour, I said, and hung up before she could respond. The drive to Richard's house felt longer than it should have. The shawl sat on the passenger seat beside me, just like it had the night of the funeral, but this time I kept glancing at it, my mind racing. Something inside it. Sewn into the lining. What did that mean? What could Mom have hidden that was valuable enough to make Megan, practical, materialistic, dismissive Megan, call me in a panic a month after the funeral? I thought about Mom's note. The one Patterson had read. I trust she will understand its value. I'd assumed she meant sentimental value, emotional value, the kind of value that couldn't be measured in dollars or divided up in a will. But what if she'd meant something else? What if she'd been trying to tell me something, and I'd been too wrapped up in my own hurt to notice? I pulled into Richard's driveway and sat there for a moment, the engine still running, the shawl in my lap. Through the front window, I could see the lights on in the study. Two silhouettes moved behind the curtain, pacing, agitated. I turned off the engine, grabbed the shawl, and walked to the door. Megan opened it before I could knock. She looked terrible. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. Richard stood behind her in the hallway, looking not much better. The house smelled like coffee that had been sitting too long and something else, paper, maybe, like someone had been going through old documents. You brought it, Megan said. It wasn't a question. You asked me to. She reached for the shawl, but I pulled it back. Not until you tell me what's going on. Megan's jaw tightened. For a moment, I thought she was going to argue. Then Richard stepped forward, putting a hand on her shoulder. Let her in, he said quietly. She deserves to know. Megan stepped aside, and I walked into the house. The study was a disaster. Papers were spread across every surface, the desk, the chairs, the floor. File boxes I'd never seen before were stacked against the wall, their lids askew. It looked like someone had been searching for something and had given up on being careful about halfway through. Richard gestured to a chair. I sat. Megan stayed standing, her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the shawl in my hands. A week ago, Richard began, I started going through Eleanor's things. Her personal papers, her old files, things she'd kept from before we were married. He ran a hand through his hair, which was grayer than I remembered. I found some letters. Old ones, from her mother. Your grandmother. I nodded. I'd never known my grandmother. She died when Mom was in her 20s, long before I was born. And in one of those letters, Richard continued, there was a note. A note about the shawl. He picked up a piece of paper from the desk and handed it to me. It was old, the paper yellowed and fragile, the handwriting faded but still legible. I recognized it immediately as my grandmother's. Mom had kept samples of her handwriting in a box, and I'd looked at them sometimes when I was young, trying to imagine the woman I'd never met. The note was short. Eleanor, my darling girl. I know you'll keep the shawl safe. It's worth more than you know. Not just to me, but to anyone who understands what's hidden in its heart. When the time comes, give it to someone you trust completely. Someone who won't be blinded by what they think they see. All my love, always. Mother. I read it twice, then looked up. I don't understand. Richard and Megan exchanged a look. Then Megan reached into her pocket and pulled out another piece of paper, this one newer, printed on plain white stock. She handed it to me. It was a photograph. Or rather, a printout of a photograph, grainy and dark, showing what looked like a piece of paper covered in handwritten text. The paper in the image was old, the edges worn, the ink faded to a soft brown. At the bottom of the printout was a caption. Lot 247, handwritten letter by Charlotte Bronte to her sister Emily, dated 1846. Estimated value, $275,000, $350,000. I stared at it. Then I looked up at Megan. This was in the shawl? We don't know. Megan's voice was tight. That's the point. We don't know what's in there. But Mom's mother, your grandmother, she was a collector. She collected rare documents, old letters, manuscripts. She had connections. She knew people who found things and sold things and sometimes hid things when they needed to be hidden. Megan took a shaky breath. And she left everything to your mother, everything. including whatever she sewed into that shawl. I looked down at the shawl in my hands. Gray wool, blue edging, worn and familiar. I thought about all the times I'd seen Mom wearing it, wrapping it around her shoulders, tucking it over her lap. I thought about the way she'd held it in those last weeks, when she was too weak to get out of bed, the way she'd run her fingers along the fabric like she was memorizing its texture. I trust she will understand its value. We need to open it, Megan said. We need to see what's inside. Dad and we've been looking through all her papers, all her files, trying to find some kind of inventory, some kind of list, but there's nothing. The only thing we know for sure is that something's in that shawl, and we need to find out what. I looked at her. At Megan, who'd laughed at me in the study after the funeral. Who'd called my inheritance a rag. Who'd spent 12 years making sure I knew I was losing whatever competition she decided we were in. The shawl is mine, I said. Megan's eyes widened. What? Mom left it to me. Not to you. Not to Richard. To me. I stood up, the shawl clutched against my chest. Whatever's inside it, that's mine too. Claire, be reasonable. This could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Millions, maybe, if there's more than one item. You can't just. I can't just what? Keep something that belongs to me? It's not that simple. Dad and we've been managing all of Mom's affairs, the estate, the bills, everything. If there's something valuable in there, it should be part of the estate. It should be divided properly. Like the house was divided? Like the car? Like the savings account? Megan's face went red. That's different. How is it different? Because you didn't need those things. You have your own apartment, your own car, your own life. Dad and we were the ones taking care of her. We were the ones dealing with the medical bills and the hospice care and everything else. It made sense for us to. It made sense for me to get a rag? The word hung in the air between us. Megan's mouth opened, then closed. Richard was staring at the floor. That's what you called it, I said, my voice quieter now. A rag. She gave me a rag, that's what she thought of me. You stood there and laughed, Megan. You laughed at my inheritance. I didn't know. You didn't know there might be something valuable inside. So it was fine to mock me when you thought it was worthless, but now that there might be money involved, suddenly we need to be reasonable. Suddenly it should be divided properly. Claire. Richard finally spoke, his voice low and tired. Please. This isn't about the money. Then what is it about? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, it's about your mother. About what she wanted. About understanding why she did what she did. I looked at him. At this man I'd known for 12 years and never really known at all. He looked older than I remembered. Older and smaller, like grief had worn away some essential part of him. She left it to me, I said. Whatever she wanted, whatever her reasons were, she left it to me. Not to you. Not to Megan. To me. I walked out of the study, through the hallway, out the front door. Megan called after me, her voice rising, but I didn't stop. I got in my car, the shawl on my lap, and I drove away. When I got home, I sat on my couch with the shawl spread across my knees and tried to figure out what to do. The rational part of me, the part that paid bills on time and checked my credit score and kept a budget spreadsheet, knew I should have it examined. Professionally, carefully, by someone who knew what they were doing. If there really was something valuable sewn inside, I didn't want to damage it. I didn't want to ruin whatever my mother had been trying to protect. But another part of me, a louder part, just wanted to know. Wanted to feel the fabric under my fingers and find the hidden seam and understand, finally, what my mother had meant when she said she trusted I would understand its value. I ran my hands along the edges of the shawl. The wool was soft, worn smooth by years of use. I could feel the stitching at the corners, neat and precise, the kind of handwork my grandmother had been known for. But as I felt along the bottom edge, my fingers caught on something different. A slight ridge, barely noticeable, hidden in the thicker weave of the border. My heart started to beat faster. I went to the kitchen and got a pair of small scissors. Then I sat back down, took a deep breath, and carefully, so carefully, began to cut. The thread came apart easily, old and brittle, practically dissolving under my scissors. As I pulled the edge of the lining back, I saw a flash of paper underneath, folded thin and pressed flat against the wool. I set down the scissors and reached inside with trembling fingers. There was more than one piece of paper. As I pulled them out, one by one, I realized there were several, maybe 6 or 7, all folded together, all different sizes and textures. Some were thick and heavy, the kind of paper you'd expect from centuries ago. Others were thinner, more modern, covered in cramped handwriting I didn't recognize. And there was something else. Something small and hard, wrapped in a scrap of cloth. I unwrapped it and found myself holding a ring, gold with a deep red stone, old and heavy and clearly valuable. I spread everything out on my coffee table and stared. The first document was a letter. The handwriting was elegant, formal, the kind you see in museum displays. The paper was thick and soft with age. I leaned closer and tried to make out the words. "My dearest sister," I read. "I have been walking the moors today and thinking of you." I stopped breathing. The signature at the bottom was faded but legible. "Your loving Charlotte." Charlotte. Charlotte Bronte. The same letter from the auction photograph Megan had shown me. I set it down with shaking hands and picked up the next document. Another letter, this one addressed to someone named Mr. Dickens. Signed at the bottom with a single name, Wilkie. Wilkie Collins. Writing to Charles Dickens. The third document was different. A page torn from a notebook, covered in dense, cramped handwriting with crossed-out words and marginal notes. I couldn't read most of it, but at the top of the page, someone had written "The Cask of Amontillado," draft notes. Edgar Allan Poe. I sat back on my couch and tried to remember how to breathe. There were more. A fragment of a poem in what looked like Emily Dickinson's hand. A receipt signed by someone named Samuel Clemens. A business letter, formal and precise, with Mark Twain's printed name at the top and a handwritten notation in the margin. And the ring. The ring that, when I turned it over, had initials engraved on the inside band, EBB. Elizabeth Barrett Browning. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the treasures spread across my coffee table. An hour, maybe, 2. Long enough for the light outside to change, for the shadows to shift across the floor, for my tea to grow cold and forgotten beside me. My grandmother had been a collector. She'd known people who found things. She'd known how to hide them. And she'd sewn them into a shawl and left them to my mother, who had left them to me. I picked up the last item, the one I'd almost overlooked. A small piece of modern paper, folded tight, tucked in among the ancient documents. I opened it and found my mother's handwriting. "Claire. If you're reading this, it means you found what I left for you. I always knew you would. Your grandmother gave me these treasures when I was young, and I've kept them safe ever since. They're worth a great deal of money, more than you might imagine. But that's not why I'm leaving them to you. I'm leaving them to you because you're the only one who ever really understood. You never asked what things were worth. You asked what they meant. You sat with me while I was sick and read me books and held my hand and never once asked about the will or the house or what you would get when I was gone. Megan is not a bad person. Neither is Richard. But they see the world in terms of what things are worth, and I needed to leave these treasures to someone who would see them for what they are. Pieces of other lives, other stories, other hearts that beat and loved and suffered and created something beautiful. Sell them if you need to. Keep them if you can. But know that I chose you for a reason, and the reason was love. All my love, always. Mom. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and held it against my chest. The next morning, I called Megan. "Before you say anything," I said, "I want you to know that I'm keeping the letters." A long silence. Then, "What letters?" "The Bronte letter. The Poe notes. All of them. I had them examined this morning by a specialist. They're authentic. They're worth." I paused, glancing at the appraisal estimates the specialist had scribbled down for me. "They're worth a lot, Megan. More than the house. More than everything else combined." Megan made a sound that might have been a gasp or might have been a sob. I couldn't tell. "But there's something else in there too," I continued. "Another document. Something Mom added herself." "What is it?" "A letter to me. Explaining why she left me the shawl. Explaining what the treasures meant to her. Explaining." I swallowed. "Explaining that she loved me." Megan was quiet. "I'm going to donate some of the items to museums," I said. "The Bronte letter, the Poe notes. They should be seen. They should be studied. They shouldn't just sit in a vault somewhere, appreciating in value." "That's?" Megan's voice was strange, thick. "That's very generous. The ring I'm keeping. And a few of the smaller items. Things that feel like they should stay in the family." I took a breath. "I'm also going to set up a scholarship fund in Mom's name. For students studying literature. English majors, creative writing, that sort of thing." Another silence. Longer this time. "Claire," Megan said finally, "I'm sorry." I blinked. "What?" "I'm sorry. For what I said after the funeral. For laughing. For calling it a rag." Her voice cracked. "I was jealous." "Jealous? Of a shawl?" "Of everything. Of how close you and Mom were. Of how she looked at you. Of how she—" Megan stopped, and I heard her take a shaky breath. "She never looked at me like that. Never talked to me the way she talked to you. I was her stepdaughter, and you were her daughter, and no matter how hard I tried, I could never." She trailed off. I waited. I thought if I had more stuff, if I got more things, it would mean she loved me more. I thought that's what the will was for. To prove who mattered most. A bitter laugh. And then you got a shawl, and I got a car, and I thought I'd won. I thought it meant something. But it didn't mean anything, did it? Not the way I thought. I looked at the treasures spread across my table. The letters, the notes, the ring. Worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Worth more than anything Megan had inherited. But Mom hadn't left them to me because of their value. She loved you too, I said quietly. In her own way. She wasn't always good at showing it. I know. Megan's voice was barely a whisper. I know she did. I just wish I'd believed it. We talked for another hour. About Mom, about the treasures, about what I planned to do with them. About Megan's life, her job, her recent breakup with a boyfriend I'd never met. About Richard, who was struggling with the empty house and the quiet evenings and the absence of the woman he'd loved for 12 years. By the time we hung up, something had shifted between us. Not a friendship, not exactly. But something gentler than what we'd had before. A truce, maybe. A beginning. 3 months later, I stood in the lobby of a university library, watching students stream past on their way to classes. A banner hung over the entrance, the Eleanor Hartley Memorial Collection. Behind me, in a glass case, the Bronte letter was displayed on a velvet stand, carefully preserved, lit from above by soft museum lighting. Richard was there, looking healthier than he had at the funeral, his color returned, his shoulders less stooped. Megan stood beside him, her arm linked through his, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Something new. Something that looked like she'd chosen it for herself, not for anyone else. The university president gave a speech about Mom's legacy, about the value of literature, about the importance of preserving the written word. I listened with half an ear, my attention caught by a group of students clustered around the display case, their faces lit with wonder as they read Charlotte Bronte's words. A piece of another life. Another story. Another heart that beat and loved and suffered and created something beautiful. After the ceremony, I slipped outside and sat on a bench overlooking the campus green. The shawl was draped across my shoulders, gray wool and blue edging, worn and familiar. I'd had it repaired after removing the treasures, the seams restitched, the fabric cleaned. It wasn't valuable anymore, not in any way Megan would understand. But when I wore it, I could still smell lavender. I could still feel my mother's hands smoothing the fabric. I could still hear her voice, soft and steady, telling me stories about her own mother, about a woman I'd never met who collected treasures and hid them in plain sight. I trust she will understand its value. I did, Mom. I finally did. I pulled the shawl tighter around my shoulders and watched the sun set over the library, the light catching the windows, turning them to gold. Somewhere inside, students were reading Charlotte Bronte's letter, discovering words that had been hidden for over a century, words that my mother had protected and my grandmother had saved and that now belonged to everyone. The sky turned pink, then orange, then a deep and quiet blue. I sat on my bench and wrapped myself in my inheritance and felt, for the first time in a very long time, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.